£30,000 in tax-free cash. Text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good evening to you. You're with GB News, the time 7 o'clock. Up next, Free Speech Nation. But first, a look at the headlines. Hundreds of people have attended the funeral of Alice da Silva Aguirre, one of the 3 girls killed in an attack in Southport now 2 weeks ago. 2 white horses wearing pink and white feathers carried her coffin in a carriage to the service in St Patrick's Church in the town. During that service, a tribute to the 9-year-old from her parents was read out by her uncle. The 9-year-old died alongside B.B. King and Elsie Stancombe during a mass stabbing at a dance class. Meanwhile, the Justice Minister says the fallout from recent riots across the country is, she says, going to be felt for years. Shabana Mahmood says it will hold back the Labour government's efforts to fix the justice system, which was already facing a massive backlog of court cases and dwindling space in prisons. Well, it comes as today a 15-year-old boy has become the first child to be convicted for his part in violent disorder in Sunderland. Meanwhile, the Education Secretary says children will be taught how to spot extremist content and fake news online in the wake of those protests. Bridget Phillipson said that she's launching a review of the curriculum in both primary and in secondary schools to arm children against what she's called putrid conspiracy theories. It comes as Sir Keir Starmer suggested the government will review social media laws as more sentences for online offences linked to the riots are expected in the coming days. We've heard today that 2 migrants have died while attempting to cross the English Channel. Around 50 people were rescued from the same boat after that vessel sent a distress signal to coastguards in France. Rescuers say they pulled many of them out of the water with fuel burn injuries. President Zelensky has for the first time acknowledged that Ukraine is conducting a military offensive inside Russia's western Kursk region. The operation, which began now 5 days ago, has taken Russia by surprise and prompted mass evacuations across both sides of the border. Ukraine says it has destroyed 53 Russian drones during an overnight strike. Here, people in northern parts of the UK are being warned to expect heavy downpours and possible flash flooding tomorrow. A yellow weather warning for thunderstorms covers Northern Ireland from midnight tonight until 7 o'clock in the morning, while an alert for Scotland and the north of England is in place from 2 a.m. Meanwhile, though, there's a sunnier picture further south with warmer weather predicted for London and the southeast, where temperatures could reach up to 34 degrees Celsius. In Paris, there's been an unexpected security scare as a man was spotted climbing the Eiffel Tower just hours before the Olympic closing ceremony tonight. The shirtless climber scaled the iconic landmark some 1,000 feet in the air, prompting French police to evacuate the area. Some visitors were briefly trapped on the second floor, but were safely escorted out shortly after. And that incident unfolded as Paris was ramping up security ahead of tonight's closing ceremony, with 30,000 officers deployed across the streets. And the King has congratulated athletes at the close of that Paris Olympic Games, calling them an inspiration tonight. In his statement, King Charles has praised Team GB and Commonwealth competitors for their outstanding success and sportsmanship. Well, Great Britain finished with 65 medals, including 14 golds, placing 7th in the medal table, though that is their lowest since 2004. Traditional sports like rowing and athletics returned medals, while newer disciplines like sport climbing saw first-time success. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, I'm Sam Francis. Your next update from the newsroom just after 8 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Riots in the UK continue. Elon Musk takes on the government, and women with male chromosomes win 2 Olympic gold medals. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is the show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics. And, of course, we'll have the latest from those lovable culture warriors, although it looks like most of them are in the government these days. Coming up on the show tonight, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has dismissed accusations of two-tier policing in the wake of the riots across the UK. But barrister Sarah Phillimore says different. She'll be joining me later to discuss that. And how does the government go about tackling the root causes of the disorder? I'm going to be speaking to academic Matt Goodwin. Comedy writer Graham Linehan will be joining me to discuss whether or not we have reached a tipping point in the gender wars. And, of course, myself and my fantastic panel will be answering questions from our wonderful studio audience. My comedian guests this evening are Paul Cox and Lewis Schaefer. The true test of a government's commitment to freedom comes in times of crisis. The riots that have erupted throughout the United Kingdom are to be condemned unequivocally, the perpetrators prosecuted, and the safety of the affected communities restored. This ought to be followed by serious discussions about why such widespread resentment has been generated and how best to address the legitimate grievances that, in some cases, have translated into illegitimate behaviour. In the meantime, we need to be vigilant. The current Labour government comprises of culture warriors who mistrust freedom of speech and will take any opportunity to impose restrictions. Don't believe me? Look at what our government posted on X this week. Think before you post. Well, that would be good advice if it was coming from a friend, but this is coming from a government that has the power to imprison people for exercising their right to free speech. Whereas many perpetrators of violence in the recent riots have rightly been arrested and prosecuted, increasingly we're seeing police knocking on people's doors for social media posts that contain disinformation or the potential to stir up hatred. Here's some footage posted on X of a man being arrested for writing something on Facebook that caused offence.
I'm actually being arrested.
You're going to be arrested, OK?
Right.
So you got to the police station.
Right.
OK, this is in relation to some comments that you've made on a Facebook page. Okay?
Oh, really? Oh, it's a Facebook crime, is it?
OK.
Right.
So we need to ask you some questions about that.
Right.
So what is happening here is that words and violence are being casually conflated, and this is where the real danger begins. Consider what happened after the murder of Conservative MP Sir David Amess in October 2021. Rather than debate how best to tackle the growing problem of Islamist terror, MPs instead used this atrocity as a springboard from which to launch a campaign for further online censorship. Now, unpleasant tweets had nothing to do with this murder, and yet the actual problem, violent religious extremism, was completely overlooked. This was political opportunism disguised as compassion. In situations of this kind, it's always best to consider how short-term solutions can jeopardise our long-term goals. We're all disturbed when we read social media posts that display animosity towards minority ethnic groups. But empowering the state to set the limits of permissible thought and speech is an even greater danger. And that is what's happening right now. So while we should vehemently criticise the man who posted the phrase "filthy bastards" on Facebook, along with emojis of a gun and an ethnic minority person, we're also right to express concern that he has been jailed for 12 weeks. Because defending free speech means defending the rights of those we find most abhorrent. There are larger principles at stake. Once a precedent has been set that enables the government to control the speech of its citizens, the pathway for future tyranny has been cleared. And this is why we should also be troubled that Stephen Parkinson, the Director of Public Prosecutions, has said that police officers are scouring social media for anyone sharing details of the riots that might, quote, incite racial hatred. He's even claimed he'll be seeking extradition of offending social media influencers from overseas, saying that they must know that they are not safe and there is nowhere to hide. It's a direct quotation. And these are not merely idle threats. Police in Cheshire have arrested a woman for sharing misinformation about the perpetrator of the horrific stabbing of children in Southport, who was wrongly identified in this case as a Muslim asylum seeker. Now, of course, it goes without saying that anyone deliberately sharing false information to promote their own cause or ideology deserves nothing but contempt. But once we accept that misinformation is sufficient to warrant prosecution, where does that end? After all, many elements of the mainstream media have been guilty of precisely the same thing. Will the police be dispatching forces to the offices of The Guardian, the Metro or the BBC anytime soon? All of the evidence would suggest that the police in the United Kingdom have fully bought into the notion that words lead directly to violence, in spite of the fact that 6 decades of research into media effects theory has provided no evidence whatsoever for such a correlation. This is an ideological position to justify censorship, one that the Labour government is fully behind. The Labour government has already jettisoned the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, which was approved by Parliament back in May 2023. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson announced her intention to see the Act repealed just 1 day before Parliament went into recess, thereby avoiding any debate on the subject. The whole affair was grimly surreptitious. Our politicians seem to believe that cracking down on freedom of speech will resolve the tensions that have fomented this current crisis. But of course, much of the resentment has come about because those who have attempted to raise their concerns have been silenced or smeared. Now, I don't think that violent protests are ever justifiable, but unless we attempt to understand why people have resorted to such measures, we cannot possibly hope to prevent the same sort of thing happening in the future. Now, this is something that the Labour government ought to understand, given that Keir Starmer was an open advocate of the Black Lives Matter movement, even as its supporters were rioting and committing acts of violence on the streets of America. He tweeted out, "We kneel with all those opposing anti-black racism," and he was observing the activist decree there that the B of black must be capitalised. Now, while I've no doubt that Starmer would have opposed the violence and the murders that took place under the auspices of BLM, he was also aware that the riots were a symptom of a broader cultural malaise that required attention. So why should the same principles not apply to the recent unrest in the UK? Now, there are certainly far-right agitators exploiting the current situation, but there were also violent far-left agitators exploiting the BLM movement. In both cases, it is perfectly possible to address the concerns that have led to civil unrest while simultaneously condemning illegal misconduct. Now, inevitably, social media companies are now under pressure to censor posts that our politicians find objectionable. In Scotland, the First Minister John Swinney has appealed to tech giants to, quote, make sure that individuals in our society are not subjected to this speculation, this alarm, this unease, which I recognise is taking place today. Journalist Paul Mason has demanded that the government quote, enact the full Online Safety Act now and summon the executives of X in the UK to explain why their CEO is personally boosting hate speech, incitement and disinformation, and pull the plug on this service until it stops. So Mason is not the only media commentator now openly declaring war on free speech. Edward Luce, who's the associate editor of the Financial Times, has railed against Elon Musk's menace to democracy and accused him of attempting to stoke racial conflict and civil breakdown. Of course, journalists will be calling for X to be shut down, because by eliminating the de facto public square, they will be better placed to control the narrative. Because for many in the media, truth is only a secondary priority to what is politically expedient. And some of the most important reporting on the riots that we've seen in recent days has come about through posts on X. And better still, Elon Musk has his community notes, and this means that facts can be verified for accuracy in real time. And up until relatively recently, the mainstream media has been able to distort reality with impunity. So Elon Musk's X represents a direct threat to the dominance of the mainstream media, because the public can now bypass the gatekeepers and seek out the truth for themselves. In the case of the recent riots in the UK, it is clear that preventing the free exchange of views has been a major catalyst. We have an ideologically captured media that can no longer be trusted. We have a police force that applies its standards according to the principles of the intersectional cult. And we have a government that is hell-bent on controlling the speech of its citizens. To impose further restrictions on speech will only exacerbate the very thing that caused the problem in the first place. It would be like getting drunk to cure a hangover. The solution to all of this, of course, is to drive out this authoritarian and identity-obsessed ideology from our major institutions. We need to open up discussions that have previously been stifled. Above all, we must reassert the primacy of free speech in a liberal democracy. Without this foundational principle, our civilization is lost. Now, I have this rather beautiful panel of two comedians. I say beautiful. You more than this one. Thank you for coming. Lewis Schaefer, do you have any thoughts on what I just said?
I think you're totally right, but wrong at the same time. First of all, the police are not captured. I've met many policemen. It's hard to get to have an opinion. It means that they have to have their opinion. They're being told what to believe in, and they believe in it. And you see the woman who you pointed out was giving the guy a ticket for what, a ticket?
Well, it was actually an actual arrest.
An actual arrest,
yes.
Right. Do you think she had a thought in her head about what she was doing? No, she was just told, you go down there, arrest the guy.
That is a very good point, isn't it? That the police don't necessarily they're not in the right position to actually challenge this stuff because they're told what to do.
No, so you can't really get mad at the police. You've got to get mad. And the second thing you said, which was wrong, you said things are wrong, which is that we need to investigate why these riots are happening, whatever. They know why the riots are happening.
Why are they happening?
They're happening because the people down there at the bottom feel that their voices haven't been that they haven't been noticed and they haven't been elected.
Paul, I'm going to have to bring you in on this. Lewis there saying I got two things wrong, although he didn't really explain why. No. But that's pretty typical for Lewis Schaefer. What do you make of it?
From my perspective, and as the guy that employs me, I've never known you to be wrong, Andrew.
Come on, Paul.
But one thing I would say is that without that monologue and GBNews and maybe even Reform, we wouldn't have any understanding of why the riots were happening, because it's probably the biggest story in my adult lifetime that I can think of that is continually reported on without saying why it's happening.
Yes.
So continuously we see these riots and we do see thugs throwing rocks.
Yes.
But behind these thugs throwing rocks, there are thousands and thousands of people that are concerned about something, but no one is illuminating what they're concerned about.
At the same time, you know, a lot of the people who've been arrested, they have charge sheets that are a mile long. There are some thugs who are jumping on board.
Absolutely.
All of this, you know.
So I totally agree with that.
And there are people saying overtly racist things and committing acts of racial violence. They should be prosecuted.
Totally agree. What they do in doing so is they entirely undermine what the problem is. The problem has been buried again.
Yeah.
Because what's happened is there have been a minority of far-right thugs that have overtaken the situation, but I still stand by what I say. There are thousands of people stood behind them with genuine concerns that aren't being heard.
Well, this is why I made the comparison with the Black Lives Matter movement, because there were a lot of people who were protesting peacefully, and their cause was entirely undermined by the people who were committing acts of violence, looting shops, even in some cases murdering people.
No, that's not. I mean,
I'm sorry, Lewis.
They weren't undermined. The Black Lives Matter thing continues and it grows, and it made people. It did work.
It did work. I think things have got a lot worse in this movement.
I don't. For this movement, yes, but for the Black Lives Matter, no. Is like what.
Well, a lot of people got rich. I will say that, but I don't. I don't think anyone can honestly say that racial tensions have been lessened in the wake of the Black Lives Matter.
Well, that wasn't what the purpose of the Black Lives Matter.
Well, we know that now because they were over.
Right, it wasn't the purpose.
Right, I know. But anyway, that's a different
But
question.
this thing is so definite, is that people know, everyone knows. It's like that. What's the Leonard Cohen song? Everybody knows.
Don't start singing, Lewis.
Yeah.
Let's get a question from Gavin. Where's Gavin? Hi, Gavin.
Yeah,
Hi.
good evening. My question is, should there be a new definition of Islamophobia?
Wow. Yeah, this is Labour's idea, isn't it? So Labour say they've been debating about whether they should adopt this new definition of Islamophobia, which is actually based on the cross-party sort of agreement on what the term could be. They said it was hate crimes against Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. I don't know quite what that means. But this came from both Labour and the Tories. I think we shouldn't put this... My worry about this is what happens with that term, Islamophobia, is you get really horrible behaviour, like the kind of people who, throw rocks at mosques or pull people's hijabs off in the streets, like just thuggish, awful behaviour. And you get that sort of conflated, sort of blended in with people who just want to criticise the religion of Islam. And, of course, every religion in a free society should be open to criticism.
Yeah, otherwise you've got blasphemy laws by the back door.
That's what people are worried about with this new Labour initiative.
Of course. There's a couple of things there. Cross-party's great, but I don't feel like there's any opposition at the moment. So there's no one challenging Labour. The Tories are in an absolute turmoil and going to spend the next 3 months arguing about who should be the leader, and in doing so have totally neglected the fact that they're in opposition, and they are no voice at the moment, no voice whatsoever to challenge Sir Keir Starmer.
No, OK. What do you think, Lewis? Any thoughts on this one?
I think we're in a very difficult situation. We're sitting here. In the past, you've had people talk, you've especially brought it up, which is between the left and the right. And here comes this growing possible threat from some other country, another continent, another religion that is going to possibly destroy both of these.
Well, I think if you're talking about extremists, I would agree. But, of course, I would say the majority of British Muslims aren't on board with extremism or that kind of thing.
And we've seen the huge demonstrations against... No, we haven't seen there's no huge demonstration against it.
Well, we could go on about this for a long time. I mean, I'm sure we'll come back to this, but we don't have time at the moment. But next on Free Speech Nation, are we experiencing two-tier policing in the UK? I'm going to be discussing this with barrister Sarah Phillimore right here in the studio. Please, do not go anywhere.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Now, we've got a story and a half to tell you and bring you now. Our very own GB News political correspondent, who we love very much, Katherine Forster, joins us in the studio, and she's smiling, but she wasn't smiling for the past few days.
2 of her sons, Matthew and Andrew, were reported missing in Bali.
I got a text from a friend saying, can you give us a call, a bit worried about them. Then spoke to a girl they'd befriended who was in Sweden, but they'd met on their travels. And she told me that they'd gone up the mountain. By the time I found out, they'd been missing for 30 hours. They'd gone up the mountain on the Tuesday night, British time. This was the Thursday morning, without a guide. And they'd told her it was really hard. And she told them to turn back, but they hadn't. And they'd sent screenshots from this app with this trail that they were following on the app, screenshots of the app in case there was a problem, and a Snapchat of a Matthew avatar at the top. And she said, I know they made it to the top because I could see that his phone had nearly died. But the trail had actually closed many years ago. So the app, we will need to make sure that gets taken off the app. But, technology saved them in the end because it was the screenshots and it was the messages that they'd sent, but they should never have been without a guide.
But what were you doing during those 30 hours that Mum couldn't, when the phone died and Mum couldn't get in touch? Where were you? What were you up to?
Well, we were trying to figure out the best course of action, because it started to pour with rain. The amount of rain created a river, like a stream.
Yeah.
We were like, oh.
Yeah.
let's follow the stream downhill, and then the sun set, and we just had to like sleep in the bushes in the jungle.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has dismissed accusations of two-tier policing in the wake of riots across the UK, calling it complete nonsense.
It's complete nonsense. We have commentators from either end of the political spectrum who like to throw accusations of bias at the police because we stand in the middle, we operate independently under the law without fear or favour.
This comes as criticism came from figures including Nigel Farage and Elon Musk, who have slammed the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and argued that last week's disorder was handled more severely than it would have been if ethnic minorities were involved. So joining me now is author and family law barrister Sarah Phillimore. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you.
So can I ask you, obviously, as your T-shirt reveals, you are associated with Fair Cop, which is a group that sort of keeps an eye on the police and the way that they're behaving. Is it true that we have two-tier policing in this country?
I think it is. And I think the discussion that's arisen is very interesting because now it's in the context of what is undoubtedly, indisputably criminal behaviour.
Yeah.
Threatening to cut people's throats or burning down hotels where people are sleeping is indisputably criminal, and those people should be arrested, charged and imprisoned for the safety of us all. The problem is, however, the context in which discussions are now taking place. We all agree that that is criminal, but we see then, as I think you alluded to earlier, on social media, the Attorney General account on X, the CPS account, are saying, if you are hateful, if you don't think before you post, we're coming to get you.
And that's the Crown Prosecution Service,
yeah.
Of course, yeah.
And Fair Cop's been warning for a very long time about the use of the word hate, because its definition includes words like unfriendliness and dislike. And we've been pointing out also for a very long time that if the police show that they are partial, then they are going to corrode public trust and confidence in their operations. And we think that's undoubtedly what has happened, certainly in the gender-critical arena. I mean,
yes. Well, that's a good example, isn't it? Because so many times gender-critical feminists have been smeared as hateful, fascist even, you know, far right. The very words that are being thrown around so casually, even though sometimes those words are correct, but just not in those contexts. So if no one can agree on these definitions, or if those words are weaponised against people's ideological opponents, how can we trust the Crown Prosecution Service to know what the difference between someone who is hateful and someone who's simply been smeared as hateful?
Well, this is the difficulty, because as Fair Cop also been saying, you cannot ring-fence your idiocy. If you're prepared to sacrifice truth in one area, we can't trust you in any. So while we can all agree that threats of violence, inciting violence, are obviously criminal, when that is then put back to us in these broader terms of if you are hateful, we're coming for you, that worries us a great deal. Because from the gender-critical perspective, and I appreciate when the police are out there dealing with angry mobs, there are operational decisions which prioritise de-escalation. So I appreciate there are different decisions that are made. I'm not necessarily going to say, oh, well, the police didn't jump in and arrest all these angry men. But when you have videos of police liaison officers telling certain groups, just leave your weapons at the mosque, it's OK, we won't arrest you. And yes. Then a man who emailed the Fair Cop website saying on the 31st of July, he and 100 others were arrested, handcuffed and held for 20 hours, the police using Section 14 of the Public Order Act. But they weren't given any warning They weren't told to disperse or be arrested. So this is why I think a lot of people are very concerned, because you have what looks like pretty obvious examples of the police behaving differently towards groups of which they are afraid,
yes,
or which they consider to be morally reprehensible. Now, I think you've got a photograph of one of our brave fair cop undercover operatives at Northumbria Pride, and I think people need to see this.
OK, well, let's see if we can have a look at that image.
Because he's posing with a police officer. That's the first image. The second, I think, is the more frightening, because it's equating TERFs with racists.
That's the sign that your undercover operative is holding.
Yes, he's next to a smiley police officer under some sort of sign which the police have set up to allow you to come and take pictures with your smiling police officers.
Yes.
It's equating TERFs with racists and saying both must be afraid. It's supporting the LGB with the T,
yes,
which, as we know, is a highly political ideology, which is not supported by all gay people and not supported by a lot of women.
So that's very interesting, because of TERFs, meaning trans-exclusionary radical feminists, which has become a kind of synonym for witch, effectively. But those signs seem to be, I mean, almost implying that violence against women is OK, or certainly saying that we're certainly taking an ideological stance.
I don't think it's implying, Andrew. I think it's saying explicitly that those of us who are slurred as trans-exclusionary radical feminists must be afraid, and it is a police officer standing next to that sign and smiling.
We've seen the police with their rainbow-coloured cars, wearing rainbow lanyards, dancing the Macarena at Pride, for goodness sake. I mean, they may perhaps think they're just all about inclusivity and being pro-LGBT. A lot of gay people see those symbols as actually homophobic. A lot of women see those symbols as misogynistic. I
mean, I think it's really wrong that the reaction to some people saying there are concerns about two-tier policing is to smear them as irresponsible or unlawful, and that's certainly where I think Keir Starmer and the Metropolitan Commissioner are going. I mean, I think we are neither. We've been warning about this. We've been sounding the alarm for a long time now. If the police abandon their fundamental ethical obligations, which is to act without fear or favour, to be impartial, then this corruption will spread. And even when they're talking about obvious examples of thuggery and violence, there'll be those such as me going, well, can I trust you? I mean, just give you another example. Hope Not Hate smeared Fair Cop as dangerous and far-right extremist. By extension, they smeared me as a member. We weren't asked about this. We weren't given any right to reply. Yet their director, Nick Lowles, in August published a really serious piece of misinformation on social media that a Muslim woman had been a victim of an acid attack. Now, that was without doubt inflammatory and inciting violence, and it did.
And it wasn't true.
Well, it was completely untrue, but he gets off scot-free because he is parroting the narrative and the views which are acceptable to the police and the government. Now, this is going to do nothing but make people fear and distrust those in authority even more.
Well, also, I mean, the police did at one point admit to two-tier policing during the grooming gang scandal. They said that they weren't applying the law equally because they were afraid of being accused of racism. That was openly admitted.
Rotherham has cast such a long shadow. I think it was only on the 24th of June some men were convicted of their involvement in that. So this is still casting a very long shadow. And I could hear that in the cries of some of the people in the protests. Stop them raping our kids. I mean, obviously, illogical in one sense, that what they were protesting was the murder of 3 children in horrific circumstances. But you can see the fear and the anger that it stirs up. And the response is not to say, shut up, you scum, we're going to come and arrest you all, because we have legitimate concerns about the ability and the willingness of the police to act impartially. And they have to address this, not simply by wagging their fingers and providing all stick, no carrot. You think before you post or we're coming to get you.
Yes.
It's not helping, it's petrol on the flames.
And we have had police in recent days admitting that they've had instructions from above. You know, we just, when there are Muslim protesters, even if they're breaking the law, just leave them well alone. We've had that police officer talking about how he met with community leaders, and of course that was to do with weaponry. And you know, people are nervous about this. But on the other hand, as you say, there is a strategic thing they have to follow, isn't there? If there's a large crowd that they won't be able to control, perhaps they do have to take
Absolutely. I can't blame the police, and I don't blame the police, and it's a fantastically difficult and terrifying job. They literally put their lives on the line for us. So the policemen on the ground, this isn't about criticising them. It's those at the College of Policing, it's those at the top of the tree who are sending them out against this backdrop of growing public distrust and not doing anything to calm it.
Yes.
I mean, I'm being told on social media I'm irresponsible for even raising the phrase two-tier policing. But I've been in it. I was at a Bristol event standing for women in 2021. The police did nothing to keep the two groups apart. A group of women just peacefully chatting, a group of young men entirely in black, in balaclavas, chanting that they wanted to kill us. A man was crouched at my feet, scrawling on the ground, Colston turfs next, i.e. he wanted to throw me in the Bristol Harbour.
But that's an example of where there's no chance that the police intervention there would have caused a riot or something. There's no reason why the police couldn't address
The police
that.
could quite easily have arrested the men who were threatening us. Not only did they fail to do that, they failed to keep any distance between the two groups. Now, that was an advanced decision. That wasn't just on the day they decided to do nothing. They had obviously discussed this and thought, well, we don't really care, do we? Because they're these nasty, bigoted, hateful women. And luckily, I then left the event, but probably everyone saw on social media, a group of women then went down to a local pub and were followed and chased by these men, and the police did nothing. So I've been in the middle of two-tier policing, and it is terrifying.
So it definitely happens. So is this just a matter of PR, maybe? Just finally, is it the case that maybe the police should just own up when obvious examples of two-tier policing occur, but say at the same time that they're going to strive to improve on that? Is it just a PR thing, or is it systemic?
I think it's deeper and it's more frightening than that, because to admit what they are doing would be to admit that the ideology that they've been protecting and pursuing is dangerous. And that is the ideology, for example, whereby a man become a woman if he declares it to be such, and anyone who objects is hateful. So if they admit what they're doing, they have to admit that the ideology that they're protecting is wrong, and their lack of partiality is also wrong. So I think this has gone very deep now, and I'm worried they're not going to be able to dig themselves out of the hole that they have merrily dug for themselves.
OK, well, it's very disturbing, but I really appreciate you coming on to explain this to us. Sarah Phillimore, thanks ever so much for joining me. And next on Free Speech Nation, so what is the root cause of the UK riots? I'm going to be joined by academic and author Matt Goodwin to explain. Please don't go anywhere.
Hello, welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go through Monday, it's going to be turning increasingly hot and humid for some of us, with the risk of thunderstorms in the northwest, but it will be turning fresher later. Looking at the bigger picture, we've got an area of higher pressure across the UK. Further towards the west, a deep area of low pressure, and that's helping drive southeasterly winds. So through the rest of this evening, many places staying largely dry, but as we go through the night, we'll see the risk of thunderstorms developing firstly in the west, but then across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland later, and we have got some weather warnings in force, so expect frequent lightning, torrential downpours and some gusty winds. And temperatures overnight, well, it's going to be feeling quite uncomfortable, some places not dipping below 20 degrees. Now, as we start Monday morning, we have this band of heavy, thundery, showery rain across western parts of Scotland, moving its way north and eastward, so there could be some difficult driving conditions in this, with frequent lightning as well and some torrential downpours. Northern Ireland turning drier as the day progresses, and across much of England, largely dry but cloudy further toward the west, and already feeling quite warm by 8 a.m. So as the day progresses, that band of rain will continue to push its way north and east, with some thunderstorms even ahead of that as well. So they can't be ruled out completely across the south, but many places should largely miss these. Many places seeing some hot sunshine, especially across the southeast. It's going to be feeling very hot and humid, with highs of up to 34 degrees, but fresher further towards the west. As we go through Tuesday, still a warm start in the south and east, but bright elsewhere. Then we have another band of rain moving in from the west, so turning increasingly cloudy, with outbreaks of rain for many across western areas, sunshine and showers behind that, and that sets the scene through Wednesday and Thursday, with unsettled weather on the way, but turning fresher as well. Bye-bye.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have said storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. So later in the show, I'll be turning agony uncle with the help of my panel, Paul Cox and Lewis Schaefer, and we'll help you deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. So just send us a message, gbnews.com/your say. We will sort your life out. 7 of the 10 most deprived areas of England witnessed riots in the past 2 weeks. The Prime Minister's polling ratings have plummeted since the outbreak of the riots in the UK, according to Telegraph polls. And Sir Keir Starmer has been criticised for his response, including the decision not to hold a Cobra meeting until a week after the outbreak. But how does the government go about tackling the root causes of the disorder? Well, joining me now is academic and author Matt Goodwin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Matt, you've been writing about this on your Substack. You're very much involved. You understand what's going on here. Help us through it, because a lot of people are really confused. Why has all this happened?
Well, I think, firstly, there's an element of criminality and disorder that we've all seen on the television screens. But I think behind that, ultimately, are widespread public concerns over mass immigration, over a broken model of multiculturalism that we might come back to talk about, and also, just to be blunt, the feeling among many British people that they're no longer safe in their own country. Now, I've received a lot of criticism for pointing this out over the last week, but one of the points I make is in response to both the riots in 2011 in England and also in response to the Black Lives Matter protests, everybody out there was more than happy to say, look, there are wider grievances here, there are some underlying issues we need to talk about. But now in 2024, we're seemingly not really allowed to discuss those issues, and I'm trying to get those issues onto the table so we can have an honest conversation.
Is that a partisan issue politically, insofar as a lot of the people causing violence on the Black Lives Matter protests were far left, and we have had some far-right elements to these riots? I mean, there are people who have been arrested multiple times over many years. Yeah. Looks very much like they're just piggybacking on this for a bit of thuggery, right? There's an element of it.
There's definitely an element of criminality, but I would have personally liked to have seen Keir Starmer come out and say, I condemn violence on all sides. But behind that, as we've even seen in the polling, we have somewhere between 40 and 60% of British people also saying, look, I don't want anything to do with this violence, but when it comes to the peaceful protesters, I either have sympathy for them, I think peaceful protest is justifiable, or I even openly support what these people are doing, because I think everybody can sense that what this is really about, it is about our broken borders, it is about the policy of mass migration, it is about multiculturalism and segregation. And many people have said to me, look, what you're doing is you're taking the Southport issue and you're trying to turn it into something else. I think, actually, no, if you look at the average person in this country, it wasn't just about Southport, it was about what happened to those police officers in Manchester, it was about the stabbing of the British Army officer, it was about the machete gangs in Southend-on-Sea. People don't just look at one incident and say, I'm now only going to focus on that. What I think this is about is a general sense of concern about the breakdown of our country and what is contributing to that. And Keir Starmer and Labour have so far shown no real interest in discussing those underlying issues.
It's part of the problem that we are seeing this in terms of left and right, whereas actually a lot of the problems with mass migration happened under the Tories. And perhaps this is the wrong way to look at it. A lot of the riots I'd say most of the riots are happening in Labour strongholds.
Well, I think ultimately this is about public opposition to an elite consensus in this country that we've had for 30 years. I don't think it's a left or right issue. I think many people are utterly frustrated with both the Conservatives and the Labour Party and how they failed to
So tell us about that. What's this elite consensus? I know you talk about this in your book.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain what you mean by
I think we're in the midst of a political and cultural revolution in this country, which is basically organised around mass migration, the erosion of our national borders, the imposition of radical progressivism or woke ideology, and a broken model of multiculturalism that basically prioritises differences among groups rather than what draws them together. And all of that has found its expression through these disturbances. We've seen how segregated our communities really are. We've seen minority communities not waving the Union Jack, but shouting, Allah Akbar as an example, or waving Palestinian flags. That's a pretty good sign that they're not really prioritising their British identity or their English identity, but we've got sectarianism in our country. We know the borders are broken. We know that many people are saying, well, why have we got 130,000 people in the country illegally? Why can't we seem to control who comes in and out of the country? And this has become really a lightning rod for this opposition to that elite consensus. And many people are saying, look, if I can't express my voice in now on social media, or I can't express my voice in the national conversation, I think actually many people have looked at things like Black Lives Matter, or they've looked at protests on other issues, and they've said, well, look, those guys are getting things done by marching and protesting in the streets. Maybe we should do that as well. And it's difficult for us to have this conversation, right? But that, I think, is what many people in the working class have concluded. No one's listening to me about grooming and the scandals in northern towns like Rotherham. Why was the rioting so severe in Rotherham? I would argue because that's where the most severe case of sexual exploitation and grooming was in Rotherham. And I think that's where people are feeling as though they don't have a voice in this conversation. So they're now, unfortunately, however, sometimes incoherently, they're taking to the streets to try and express that.
Now, of course, the word racism is thrown around an awful lot, and maybe it comes down to a misunderstanding of multiculturalism. And I would argue that the very philosophy of multiculturalism, that various groups should live in parallel societies, sealed off, that's a kind of form of soft racism. But is it just to do with a misunderstanding of what multiculturalism means?
Yeah, well, I think we have this rather ridiculous debate among columnists and elites in this country, which is multiculturalism is a success story. How dare you question it? It's very visible to anybody who lives outside the M25 that it's not really working. What multiculturalism, the policy of multiculturalism does is it prioritises minority groups, their history, their identity, their culture and their values. It says you can keep all of those things, you can stay distinctive from the wider national community, but at the same time it says to the majority group, you cannot really defend and celebrate your identity, your history and your values. And if anything, what we want you to do is reshape those things around universal liberal values like diversity and multiculturalism. So lots of British people and English people are saying, well, hang on, how come these groups are allowed to prioritise who they are and celebrate it and defend it, but we're now being told that we have to reshape our entire identity around these universal liberal themes? Because, look, Andrew, to say that a country is welcoming of diversity is fine, right? Whatever. But it's actually not the basis of an identity, because it's like saying you have no identity of your own. If the only thing that really unites you is that you're welcoming difference, well, OK. But it's also like saying there's nothing unique about you. And many British and English people feel there is something really unique about being British and English. It's not a race thing. It's just we've got a remarkable set of values. We've got a great culture. We've got a great history. But we're told time and time again that we should be ashamed of that. We should be embarrassed about that.
OK, well, final question. What can Keir Starmer actually do? Isn't he in quite a difficult position? The Labour Party are saying that they're trying to resolve all of this issue, but is it clear to you that they are failing, or are they trying their best?
I think this has been a complete failure for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. We've seen in the newspapers this weekend that they've admitted they're frightened and they're scared to talk about the underlying causes because they're worried that will be seen to be justifying the unrest and the disturbances. So, what they've done instead is they've had this bizarre conversation about social media and clamping down on free speech and free expression, which you've been talking about with other guests. But unless we actually get into this much more meaningful conversation about how we're going to control our borders, what do we need to do? We need to leave the ECHR and reform the Human Rights Act. How are we going to end the policy of mass immigration? Nobody really wants it. Nobody really voted for it. It's dividing and weakening our country. And how are we going to replace this broken policy of multiculturalism with a more assertive assimilationist model that says to people, look, we're not going to tolerate people who hate who we are anymore. We're going to change our country. We're going to give us a sense of confidence, a sense of hope in the future. We're not going to allow this disorder and chaos to continue. We need to get into that conversation. Keir Starmer will not get into that conversation, which means I think inevitably we're going to have a lot of people looking for a different kind of politics going forward.
Matt Goodwin, thanks very much for joining me. Really appreciate it. And if you want to hear more from Matt, I would highly recommend his Substack, which is at matthewgoodwin.org. It is brilliant. Check it out. And next on Free Speech Nation, is civilization under siege? We'll be addressing that with Jacob Reynolds. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Tom Harwood. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
It's a very difficult issue, this, right? As far as we know, the boxer with male chromosomes was born with female genitalia.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite simple. You know, sex in humans is binary and immutable because we are mammals. And there is a minority of people who have disorders of sexual development, and that can affect a person's reproductive organs. But these people are male or female. And yesterday, what we witnessed was basically just glorified male violence against women and girls. The difference is, I mean, that happens every day all over the world. And the difference is that in every other circumstance, we consider beating up women to be wrong, but it was deemed acceptable by those at the IOC because they're claiming that it's sport, but it's not. It's violence and it's wrong.
Peter, Lottie's right, isn't she, that we've been talking a lot recently about violence against women and girls, and regardless of whether this person is intersex or transgender, they have male chromosomes. That means they have a very, very distinct biological advantage that could actually be fatal to a female athlete competing against them.
Well, of course, sport does need to be fair, and we do need to examine this case very thoroughly. There are reports that the boxer, Iman Khalif, was born a biological woman. She is not transgender. She is not non-binary. She is not intersex. She may have elevated levels of testosterone, but that's entirely natural. It's beyond her control. It's the way she was born. And that is why the International Olympic Committee has said that she falls within the rules.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. So, what is civilization? How does it emerge? Is it under attack? These are very big questions. Well, Jacob Reynolds is the convener of The Academy, which is a forthcoming weekend for free thinkers to discuss these very issues. And Jacob joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot.
Jacob, tell us, what is The Academy?
Yeah, well, The Academy is a weekend residential, a kind of intellectual getaway, if you like, where people of various different backgrounds and intellectual persuasions come. We have a weekend of lectures, of debates, of seminars. We kind of try and educate ourselves. We sometimes say it's university as it should be. And yeah, and this year's theme is, as you suggested, is civilization under siege, touching on this idea that kind of wherever we look, it seems that the questions we're faced with are kind of big, deep, civilizational ones, not just normal kind of political day-to-day ones.
And this is a big theme at the moment. A lot of people are talking about this. Is our civilization under threat? What type of discussions are you having? What kind of speakers have you got?
Yeah, so I mean, we're looking at this from a variety of angles. I mean, as Matt Goodwin was saying, maybe in the UK there's a question about kind of, do we have different civilizations living alongside each other now, or do we have a big question to answer about what it means to be British, or what does Western civilization mean today? But also internationally, there's kind of increasing kind of suggestion that, say, at stake in the war in Ukraine is a kind of civilizational battle between the West and the East, if you like, or similar questions in Israel. So we're tackling all of those themes. We've got some great speakers. I mean, most importantly, for us tonight, yourself.
Of course.
But also some really great speakers like Lord Frost, David Frost, Frank Frady, who might have been on this show before. And it's filled with academics, authors, kind of public intellectuals, and most importantly, a really great audience who have read and thought about these issues.
And that's one of the key things about the way the Academy is run, I think, is that you are bringing the audience in to discuss. You dedicate a lot of time, not just to people standing there giving speeches, but to have responses from the crowd. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, the event, which is next weekend, I mean, we've published a reading list for that for several months, and we hope that lots of the people who are there would have really kind of dug into this, read some of the interesting books we've got on the reading list. And in addition to that, as you say, we've got loads of time. So there'll be lectures, but there's also plenty of time for debate and discussion. And of course, that continues over dinner and a glass of wine or a beer.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, because it's a weekend away, people get together and they talk. And these are really, really important discussions to be having, aren't they? I mean, and do you think in a sense that we are failing to have these discussions, that we need more events like this so that these things are broached?
Well, yeah, and especially with regard to our topic on civilization, right? So it sometimes seems that it's just something that's happening out there, that are we under attack? And really, if we think that there's something kind of missing in our culture, in our civilization that's worth defending, we have to be out there understanding, well, how did the West emerge? What kind of ideas makes the West distinct or different? And from that, in conversation with other people, we might have a better chance of actually standing up for them.
And are you hoping to get some dissent here, or do you think everyone will be singing from the same hymn sheet?
Well, certainly, especially on like these questions of, especially when it becomes international, there are lots of people I know who I'm friends with or have conversations with who maybe they're certainly on my side on the culture war, for example, but when it comes to the war in Ukraine or what's happening in Israel, we suddenly find ourselves on very different kind of points of view. And I think this shows how difficult and often kind of murky this whole concept of civilization, of Western civilization, what the West is, etc. That's why it's so difficult, and we kind of need to come together and have some of these debates.
So how do people go about finding more about this, and what's the format of the weekend?
Yeah, so I mean, first off, go to Ideas Matter website, ideasmatter.org.uk/academy. The format of the weekend is, as I say, weekend, residential. You can come for the day. There are day tickets available, but the best experience come. There are still a few rooms left. Grab yourself a room. You'll have kind of a full board. There's great food, a chance to have a glass of wine afterwards. But head to the website, and it's quite a full-on weekend. Lots of lectures, but plenty of time for debate and discussion too.
Yeah, and one of the things that interested me is I'll be speaking about Shakespeare, for instance. That's kind of, it's not a culture war thing. You know, this is a much bigger question than just...
Well, yeah, I mean, the reason we invited you to speak on a topic like that, and we have a few other ones, is that, I mean, some people who come across as culture warriors saying, oh, we have to stand up for the West, or the West is under attack or something. Actually, it seems sometimes they don't really have a good grasp on, well, what is Western culture? You ask them kind of who's your favourite author, or what makes Shakespeare so great, and they seem to have kind of bad answers to that. You, I know, will have a better one, but we need to kind of get better at understanding what our culture actually is.
I hope so. So it's not just about what is civilization, it's what is worth defending about our civilization.
Yeah, precisely. And these are kind of big, meaty topics that, especially, as I say, when it becomes internationalised, we need to have really good answers, because there are certainly competing civilizations out there who do have the answers.
Thanks very much, Jacob. Finally, what's the website again?
ideasmatter.org.uk/academy.
Jacob Reynolds, thanks so much for joining me. That's the end of the first hour on Free Speech Nation, but don't go anywhere, there's loads more to come.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, Hello, welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go through Monday, it's going to be turning increasingly hot and humid for some of us, with the risk of thunderstorms in the northwest, but it will be turning fresher later. Looking at the bigger picture, we've got an area of higher pressure across the UK. Further towards the west, a deep area of low pressure, and that's helping drive southeasterly winds. So through the rest of this evening, many places staying largely dry, but as we go through the night, we'll see the risk of thunderstorms developing firstly in the west, but then across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland later, and we have got some weather warnings in force, so expect frequent lightning, torrential downpours and some gusty winds. And temperatures overnight, well, it's going to be feeling quite uncomfortable, some places not dipping below 20 degrees. Now, as we start Monday morning, we have this band of heavy, thundery, showery rain across western parts of Scotland, moving its way north and eastward, so there could be some difficult driving conditions in this, with frequent lightning as well and some torrential downpours. Northern Ireland turning drier as the day progresses, and across much of England, largely dry but cloudy further toward the west, and already feeling quite warm by 8 a.m. So as the day progresses, that band of rain will continue to push its way north and east, with some thunderstorms even ahead of that as well. So they can't be ruled out completely across the south, but many places should largely miss these. Many places seeing some hot sunshine, especially across the southeast. It's going to be feeling very hot and humid, with highs of up to 34 degrees, but fresher further towards the west. As we go through Tuesday, still a warm start in the south and east, but bright elsewhere. Then we have another band of rain moving in from the west, so turning increasingly cloudy, with outbreaks of rain for many across western areas, sunshine and showers behind that, and that sets the scene through Wednesday and Thursday, with unsettled weather on the way, but turning fresher as well. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on a chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Did you ever flirt with the idea of going to America?
Yeah, I've twice happened to me. Once I was offered in Canada the job of a weatherman.
Oh.
Yeah, I was offered that, and I just sort of thought of it. What is the point where your mother, your father would never see you on TV? What's the point of doing it if nobody knows you on it? You know. So I thought.
Big money though, even for a weatherman.
Well, I did. Yeah, it was more than a weather job, but I said no, basically. And then I went and I did this quiz show for Fox TV.
Oh.
Yeah, and they said, we want the Irish guy that does the lottery. I think they meant Dermot O'Leary or something. They ended up, they got me, and I couldn't believe it. And I went over to do a daytime version of this. And then 3 days into it, they changed everything, and they said, this is so good, we're putting this out in the evening. And I remember phoning my wife and saying, we're going to have to move out to California.
Oh, wow.
They really want me here, and I'm going down. You know that street with all the palm trees and whatever? That's the way I was going to work, in this limo and whatever. And I had a bungalow there and a golf cart. It was absolutely incredible. Anyway, I'll cut this very long story short. So I'm working really, really bad. A lot of very ignorant people, it has to be said. And really have one regret in my life, that I didn't punch a guy when I was out there. I really would have, if I had my life to live again, I would have really satisfiedly been sacked for punching this git. But basically, anyway, they put the show out. One episode of the show went out, and it came fourth in its rating. So it was behind Lost, it was behind The Biggest Loser, there was something else there.
Fair enough.
Fair enough, and it came fourth, and that was it. it disappeared. 36 shows or so disappeared. Disappeared, never to be shown again.
GB News, the People's Channel.
There's plenty more still to come on Free Speech Nation this week, but let's get a news update first with Sam Francis.
Andrew, thank you very much, and good evening to you. It's just after 8 o'clock. We'll start this hour with news from the Olympics. Team GB's been hailed as an inspiration by the Prince and the Princess of Wales following their impressive performance at the Paris Games. And in a video featuring Snoop Dogg and David Beckham, the Royals have praised the athletes, with William and Kate offering their congratulations. Take a listen.
Greetings, loved ones.
From all of us watching at home, congratulations to Team GB.
Well done on all you've achieved. You've been an inspiration to us all.
Short and sweet. Great Britain secured 65 medals in their second-best haul ever at an Olympic Games, but fell 7th in the medal tables. That's their lowest since Athens in 2004. Well, while traditional sports like athletics and cycling delivered, new disciplines like skateboarding and sport climbing also shone. And as Team GB now look ahead to Los Angeles 2028, preparations are already underway at Stanford University. In other news tonight, hundreds of people have attended the funeral service of Alice da Silva Aguirre, one of the 3 girls killed in the attack in Southport 2 weeks ago. 2 white horses wearing pink and white feathers carried her coffin in a carriage to that service in St Patrick's Church in the town. And during the service, a tribute to the 9-year-old from her parents was read out by her uncle. The 9-year-old died alongside Bebe King and Elsie Stankham during a mass stabbing at a dance class. Meanwhile, the Justice Minister says the fallout from recent riots sparked by that stabbing in Southport is going to be felt for years. Shabana Mahmood says it will hold back the Labour government's efforts to fix the justice system, which was already facing a massive backlog of court cases and dwindling space in prisons. It comes as today a 15-year-old boy has become the first child to be convicted for his part in violent disorder in Sunderland. The Housing Secretary has dropped Conservative plans to prevent recently arrived migrants from applying for a council house in England. The previous government had planned to introduce a UK connection test, which would have restricted social housing to those who had been a resident in the UK for at least 10 years. But Angela Rayner scrapped that plan and vowed to ramp up the provision of new social homes as part of a wider planning reform to boost house building. And it comes as almost 1.3 million households are on local authority waiting lists for social housing. President Zelensky has today, for the first time, acknowledged that Ukraine is conducting a military offensive inside Russia's western Kursk region. That operation, which began now 5 days ago, has taken Russia by surprise and prompted mass evacuations across both sides of the border. Ukraine says it destroyed more than 50 drones during an overnight strike from Russia. Meanwhile, the Justice Minister says the fallout from recent riots, that is not the correct story. We will move on.
Ukraine's got a very long border.
Apologies for that there, the wrong script in the auto cue for you. Banksy's confirmed that he is behind new fish artwork, which has appeared on a police box in central London. It's the 7th animal-themed piece the elusive street artist has claimed so far this week. He's used translucent spray paint on the glass windows to create the design, turning the sentry box into what looks like a giant fish tank. Now, experts say that people will have to decide for themselves just what they think it represents. I've read that about 4 times. I still don't have a clue. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, I'm Sam Francis. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
To Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. That was Sam Francis with the news. Sam is a pescatarian. Do you know that, Lewis?
Yes, I heard that. It's quite amazing. He hates fish.
Hates fish?
Specifically. And wants them dead.
Yeah.
And he's willing to kill them. He's willing to eat them with his own mouth. That's how much he...
It's so extreme, isn't it? I work with such extremists. Anyway, let's get some more questions from this lovely audience. First question is coming from Sarah. Where's Sarah? Hi, Sarah. Hello.
Hi. Should Imani Khalif be allowed to participate in any more women's
sporting events.
Yeah, this is the big one, isn't it? Amani Khalif, of course, just won gold in spite of the fact that the gender test taken last year for the International Boxing Association came up as XY. Likelihood, Paul, is that Amani Khalif is male but has a DSD, different sex development condition, an intersex condition, which means that Khalif didn't know about his sex until later in life. Now, I think you should have compassion for that, right?
There is compassion, of course there is. However, sport is about fairness, and she has an unfair advantage over her competitors through XY chromosomes. It gives her a different biology, a different muscle structure, probably a different bone structure, certainly different strength. So as a result, she has an unfair advantage.
And also the Taiwanese competitor.
Yeah, which they were both in the final, weren't they?
Yeah.
Both finalists had previously tested for XY chromosome.
So this is a problem. I don't think anyone's suggesting that we don't understand that obviously people with people have intersex conditions, but this is not a trans issue. I think that's the thing that's not really understood. This isn't a trans issue. These are individuals who have been through male puberty and therefore have a huge competitive advantage over women. And there's also a safety issue, isn't there? Because, you know, if male people are punching women in the face, I mean, surely someone should intervene. Just
no, well, absolutely. There's a reason that boxing for all genders has weight limits.
Right.
So for that very fairness, the Queensberry rules of boxing. You know, you're not. I could win the under-9s boxing championships.
Yes.
Almost certainly, especially in the girls' division.
Yeah.
And you know, there are reasons that I can't compete in it.
But I think this is something to be really clear about, because we've had situations where men have identified as women, and like people like Leah Thomas, and won all the awards in swimming. But that's just fraudulence, isn't it? This is a slightly more complicated issue, because these are people who suffer from intersex conditions and therefore were raised and socialised as if they were girls, did not realise they were male. So it's a totally different thing. But ultimately, their hurt feelings shouldn't be prioritised over the safety of female athletes. Am I right?
Well, maybe, but I think we should care about people's feelings. I'm not totally anti other people's feelings.
You could have fooled me, Lewis.
Well, I try to go out of my way to care. I try. It doesn't work. The truth is that, you know, what about people with big feet or tall girls or whatever? Nobody wants this whole thing is what's
yeah, but there's a difference, isn't there, between the differences between different women and the whole category of women's sports. I mean, are you suggesting we just get rid of women's sports?
I think I was about to go there, yes.
Yeah, I knew you were. I knew you were.
No,
that's going to go down well.
Nobody wants to see women getting hit.
Can we?
People don't want to. They don't want to see that.
Can we just remind the audience that Lewis Schaefer asked, "What about people with big feet, Andrew?"
What about people with big feet? That's the next civil rights issue, apparently. Okay, let's move on.
If someone has big feet, you could say, you know what, or big hands, or the woman's length is too big.
Lewis, the reason why women's sport was invented as a category is so they could win some things.
Yeah.
So that women's sports could be a thing.
No,
right? You can't say you have a separate category of people with big feet.
Well, they should.
Okay. I'm not dignifying this anymore. I know it's Free Speech Nation, but I'm going to shut him up. All right, let's move on to a question from Brian. Where's Brian? Hi, Brian.
Hi. Is it right that Richard Dawkins has lost his Facebook account?
Did you read about this online? Did you see it?
No, but
yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? Like the Richard Dawkins simply put out a tweet, and it was about this question that we've been discussing, and it was, you know, in his very polite way, just saying, you know, asking the question: should genetically male boxers such as Amani Khalif, and he actually said it's an XY, undisputed, no one's disputing that these are XY chromosomes, should Khalif fight women in the Olympics? That's a reasonable question. Had the Facebook account completely nuked? Right now, you're quite careful actually online, aren't you, Lewis? You don't say controversial things.
Because I think horrible thoughts.
Yes, I know you do. But I wish you had that kind of filter on this show.
Yeah, well, because you're not going to win by having nice thoughts. I was always against you because I thought free speech is not such an important thing, but it is really important. The truth is that I've actually met Richard Dawkins. He's a lovely guy. He's the kind of guy that he never said anything that anybody would ever disagree with because he was on the side of the evil, of the nice people. So for him, this is like a shock to him. It's like, it's like the same thing with Miss, what's the one? You know who I'm talking about.
You could be talking about absolutely anyone, Lewis, and I wouldn't have a clue.
It's Miss Turf Lady.
J.K. Rowling.
When she came out and said, you know, what she said, she was like shocked that people, because she had never heard anybody say.
Okay, so let me just do a quick translation here. So what Lewis is talking about is people who have been traditionally on the left, who suddenly find that they're making a totally reasonable point about women's rights, and they're suddenly treated as though they're fascist. And that must be a shock, right?
Well, yeah, because we're so tribalised and binarised now.
Yeah.
I don't know if binarised is a word, but I'm going
Let's go with it. I like it. So Dawkins, I mean, but to have your entire Facebook account...
Oh, well, that's ridiculous, isn't it? It is free speech just counting out. I mean, you can argue that Facebook is a private company, everyone does that, but do you know... Some people would disagree with Richard Dawkins in the sense that if you were a staunch Christian, you might have a few problems with Richard Dawkins. But the idea of debate being taken away...
But the people who are his people are not Christians.
No, exactly. However, the idea that you take away free debate is absolutely crazy. It's a really worrying time in the sense that the people that run this country want to take away free debate. So when you see these little isolated incidents, you sometimes dismiss them. And then when the government that's in control of what we do are saying you can't have free debate, and then someone's just shut down like that, there's no recourse for him.
Well, also, social media is the de facto public square, and we have seen how governments are colluding with social media to censor things they don't like.
But
we saw the FBI do it in America with Twitter, with the Twitter file.
Yes, it's dangerous. It's not just the government. The fact is that even if there was no government, that Facebook, if it persisted in letting people express those beliefs that it's a man, would be shut down. Their advertising would be cut, as what's happened.
But what's wrong? What's so wrong with just letting people say what they want to say, even if it's objectionable, even if you don't like it, you can disagree, you can turn them off. You don't have to read it. I mean, I don't get this obsession with let's just make sure that everyone has the identical opinion. I don't get it.
He pointed out that she took a gender test that came back XY.
Right.
That's it.
That's it.
And that was the truth. It's like saying, you know, I got a B in GCSE drama.
Yeah.
If Richard Dawkins had said Paul Cox got a B in GCSE drama, he shouldn't have his account shut down. They're two different things, but the truth is the same.
Yeah, but what I don't understand the sort of militancy of this. So Richard Dawkins expresses that view, and I agree with Richard Dawkins on this. But if someone writes online, I think it's disgusting that people are trying to suggest that this athlete shouldn't be able to compete in the women's sports, etc. I'm not going to say, oh, well, because you disagree, I'd like that shut down. I'd like your account removed. It's like, that's someone who thinks about the world differently from me. That's called a plural society. Nothing wrong with that.
I'll explain it to you.
Go on.
I will explain it to you.
Can't wait.
Is that there are two sides, and one side is the left side, the Team World side, which is the side that, you know, if someone wants to say that they're a woman, you got to let them go with it. Self-identity. And people are fighting for that because they have nothing else in their lives.
What you're saying is that one side of this is authoritarian and the other side is for open debate?
No, because you're being authoritarian by saying that that's a man. When
no, that's an expression of an expression of biological fact.
You would say what fact is, but if you ask somebody on the other side, they might question that.
OK, well, they're free to question facts if they want to. Good luck with that. We're going to move on to a question from Jane. Hi, Jane. Hi.
Hi. Should people be allowed to wear what they want or like at work?
Jane, I wonder what you're alluding to there. I think there was a story this week about a civil servant from the Department for Work and Pensions who wore... This is a transgender civil servant called Saoirse, I think, Amathea Tweedale, who wore fetish gear to work. I mean, proper... It was like fishnet tights and sort of... a kind of
choker.
A choker with a pentagram on it. It's like, and you look at the images and you kind of think, there has to be a dress code, right? Like, I don't care what people wear in their own private life, but if I decided to come on this show in fetish gear and present the show, I think my boss might say, could you not do that? I think that would be reasonable. That wouldn't be an infringement on my rights, would it?
No, it wouldn't be an infringement on your rights, and that's a really good question because this whole thing emanated from one question, which was, are people that practice BDSM a protected group?
They're not.
And that was an unanswered question.
They're obviously not.
No, they're not. They're not.
It could be a protected group.
Are people who like bestiality protected? Where do you stop?
Do you remember that Canadian woodwork teacher that wore these huge prosthetic breasts, these rubber breasts that were they're absolutely massive? I know you found it arousing, but that's a different question. I don't want to go into it. But that was a man who thought he was a woman with massive fake breasts, and of course the school was saying no, but that's his identity. Or they said her identity. That's who she is inside. No, that's just fetish gear. Right, and you should be able to say at a school you can't wear fetish gear.
Of course you should be able to, but remember what happens when you believe a small little lie. You've got to play along with it, and that's what this Team World left is doing. You got to play along with it.
The audience is very confused by the Team World stuff, but believe me, it's something that Lewis goes on about. And you should get that on a T-shirt. That's like your slogan, isn't it?
I possibly should.
Yeah, you need more merch.
My friend Lucy did some fantastic work on that.
Yeah, because you've got a calendar already.
I've got a calendar for this. If you want to buy a calendar for the last 2 months of this year, you could.
Yeah, not worth it, is it?
It stops in October.
You should at least give them a discount if it's a 2-month calendar. All right, let's move on. I've got a question now from Ellen Yeo.
Are universities really at their tipping point?
There's been a few articles about this week because there's basically a financial crisis, and a lot of universities saying they can't afford it anymore. I think part of this, Paul, is, of course, because of the last government's attempts to cut down on migration, it actually has affected students. And, of course, international students pay a lot more in student fees than domestic students. And, of course, there has been a drop, and universities are struggling now, right?
I'd be interested to know, and I don't know the answer to this, how many universities there are now compared to 20, maybe 30 years ago, particularly during Tony Blair's Labour years when this was pushed.
Yeah, well, Tony Blair was always saying he recently said he wanted up to 70% of young people to go to university. But I kind of think, what's the point? There are other things you can do.
And we now know what's the point.
Yeah.
And what's happened is these students are... Lewis, you will have to let me finish.
Wow, it's getting frosty. Go on, Paul.
The students are being treated as sort of commodities because there are not enough students to go around for the universities. It's not a problem for students. They're framing it in a way that universities are going to crumble and students are going to fail. That's not true. Students are going to be fine. There is more universities they can shake a stick at. What we've got is too many universities.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. I mean, I always felt that there was a kind of snobbishness about this. It's like, the successive governments saying we want to get as many people in university as possible. What's wrong if you're not academically minded, but you're talented at other things, going into an apprenticeship for a trade or something like that? Well, it's really snobbish, I think. It's this idea that, unless you're studying something at university, you're somehow lesser. And I think that's nonsense.
I agree with you. And at the end of the day, what is the university system in Britain or America? It's basically tourism. It's basically getting money from people to come to...
Did you go to university?
Of course I went to university. Look what it did for me.
What did you study?
Because I'm of a certain age. I'm not going to tell you what I studied.
Wow. Was it theatre studies or drama?
It wasn't theatre studies, but I got a BA.
Interpretive dance.
A BA?
I got a BA. I went to a very good university. It was very expensive. And at the end of here's the problem. It wasn't that expensive compared to what it is now.
No.
Because what is the university system? It's basically a welfare, or we would say in America, benefits program for the left.
Yeah, but the kids now, they're getting like £50,000 debt. I mean, when I went to university, I had a full maintenance grant because it was means tested and my family didn't have any money.
But you deserved it because you were smart and you're old.
Yeah, but that wasn't even to do with academia. It was just to do with means testing. So it meant that you could go to university even if you didn't have much money.
But those people back then who weren't you, they weren't even means tested because they thought to themselves, I'm not going to go to university. But now
they're getting all this.
It is a waste. Imagine spending 40 grand
on my kid
on a gender studies degree, only to find out when you got to the end there aren't two, there are 58 of them. You've got to do the whole course again.
Tell your kids not to do university.
Well, one of my kids did, and he seems suited for it because he's a nerd. And the other one who's a bit fat, and the other, he sits there just writing papers and talking about stuff. I think he's meant to do it, but the other one is just too good-looking to waste his time.
OK, I really hope that Lewis's children don't watch this show.
They do watch it. They do watch it.
Well, I can't take responsibility.
The one who is not that good-looking, he knows it. And
right, Lewis, I'm going to cut you off for your own sake. We're going to move on now to a question from Audrey. Hi, Audrey.
Hello. Was Celine Dion justified?
This was interesting. So Celine Dion, who I think is very talented, and she criticised the fact that her song, My Heart Will Go On, from Titanic, you all know it, was used as part of Donald Trump's presidential campaign event. But we've seen this quite a lot. There's always been a situation where politicians use pop stars' stuff, like the Rolling Stones or whatever, and the pop stars complain because they don't support the politician. What do you think? I mean, does Celine Dion... I mean, she also said something like, but that song, why choose that song?
And it's a good point. And that film, Titanic,
what a weird one to choose.
It is an interesting choice, but it's Donald Trump. I think, he doesn't care for a start. Let's have it right. And it's not about whether she gave him permission or not. It's because it's Donald Trump, and she has to come out and say that she doesn't support the use of the song because she doesn't support Donald Trump.
You'd think, though, she quite like the fact that the song's getting out there. Mind you, she's fine. She's got enough money.
She's doing absolutely wonderfully. When I last spoke to her, things were rosy.
Oh, really?
She's very sick. She's actually sickly, if you've been following.
She hasn't been well, but she did perform at the Paris Olympics. She seemed to be doing very well then, so she's getting through it.
Yeah, here's the point. The point about this thing is that nobody, if you're somebody, you don't want to be associated with something that's going to make 50% of the population hate you for having them use it. And that's what happened. People who don't like Donald Trump, they're going to think to themselves, I'm not going to but I'm not going to...
On the other hand, you know, when you make a song, it's sort of out there then.
Yeah, it's
in
like
the public
art.
domain, like anyone can play it.
Supposedly you can't do it according to this, because her people sent a letter to Donald Trump's people saying, I don't want, because it was her image on a screen, supposedly.
Was it?
Yeah.
Because famously, you know, court proceedings have stopped Donald Trump doing some things. So he's going to be really concerned.
You're making a joke. These people don't understand.
OK. Well, look, we've got to move on now for Lewis's sake. But next on Free Speech Nation, Dr. Almut Gadau will be joining me. She was dismissed from the Open University for questioning an EDI diktat. So please, don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
We're joined now by GB News national reporter Charlie Peters, who is outside Buckingham Palace for us.
Well, let's start with the expenditure, shall we? From the last year, it was £89.1 million. That's what the royal household spent. And one of the core parts of that expenditure was, of course, their big event last May, the coronation. £800,000 went into that. And then we should look at the engagements. You mentioned the number that King Charles made last year. Well, £4.2 million on those engagements, much of that travel. And then finally, how much that costs us all? Well, it's £1.29 per person. That's the cost of the monarchy to the taxpayer. But that really hides the truth of how that cash comes about, because all of the money that the royal household spends is actually theirs being given back to them by the Treasury. It comes from the Crown Estate surplus. That's a £16 billion portfolio they have, and their sovereign grant is made up of the surplus from 2 years prior. So in the year to 2022, there was about £350 million knocking around from the surplus. That was given all to the Treasury, and they were given back 15% as their core sovereign grant. Additional 10% was given towards the resurfacing of Buckingham Palace. That's been going on since Parliament voted on it in 2017. It's expected to take 10 years. But all in all, that's been about £86.3 million. And as you heard, the expenditure was £89 million. So how do they mix that gap? How do they close that gap in and cost out? Well, they make their own money as well from additional sources of income. And that was the gates, the receipts to Windsor Castle and their many palaces across the country, where people have paid about £10 million to visit in the last year.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Now, Dr. Almut Gadau was dismissed from the Open University for questioning a DEI diktat that criminal law tutors must liberate the curriculum by introducing diverse gender identities and teaching students to use offenders' preferred pronouns. Managers have claimed she'd created an environment which, quote, isn't inclusive, trans-friendly or respectful. Well, I'm now joined by Dr. Almut Gadau. Welcome to the show. So I've given there just a brief summary, but perhaps you could tell us more about the background to this. You're a law lecturer, right?
I am a law lecturer, yes. So I taught various law modules in the Open University's law school. And then around the start of the decade, a lot more of the critical social justice theories were just generally coming into the teaching. And the undergraduate law curriculum was then rewritten completely around a core theme of liberating the curriculum, which basically means that whichever kind of law you teach, you have to use it as a vehicle to convey critical social justice theories like anti-racism and decoloniality.
Yeah, because we've seen similar things in English literature, decolonising the curriculum, that kind of thing. But when it comes to something like law, is that not the case that really there isn't room there to be pushing an ideology? It should be about what is the law?
Oh, it absolutely should be. And it was more trying to crowbar it in somewhere where just to find a way of fitting in references to these critical social justice themes somewhere. And I actually challenged that on various modules. So at some point I questioned the decoloniality on one module, and at another point I questioned the anti-racism on another module, which seemed to be acceptable. But when I then questioned why I had to teach gender identity belief as part of teaching criminal law, that apparently was beyond the pale. And when I asked questions about the teaching of genderism as part of criminal law, the response that I got from university management was just, we're not going to discuss it. You will teach this to your students. The subject is closed. And then they waited to the end of the academic year and then took disciplinary action and sacked me for the gross misconduct of questioning the teaching of gender identity belief as part of criminal law module.
Did they not accept that the belief that we have a gender identity is, in fact, a highly contested belief that actually is shared by a small minority of the population?
Well, that was actually one of the first points I made. It wasn't that I went out wanting to teach any particular views or share with my colleagues any particular views on gender. What I started out saying really was, can we not include this in the teaching of criminal law because it's just a distraction? My students have enough on their plate understanding the criminal law, understanding the offences I'm telling them about, understanding how to tackle a legal problem and so forth. I don't then have to be sidetracked by talking about the fact that there are over 100 gender identities out there. Can I just focus on teaching criminal law in my criminal law tutorials?
I mean, it seems quite reasonable, to be honest.
Yes, but apparently the answer to that was no. Or more specifically, the answer that I got at the time was that I had to include it in order to help achieve broader objectives of liberating the curriculum.
Liberating the curriculum.
Yes.
I mean, that's an astonishing phrase. And the thing about this is, it's not just a matter of them saying, you can't say this, you can't say that, not like a free speech issue. They're actually trying to compel you to say things, to express beliefs you don't hold for whatever reason. Have I read that right?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Actually, the Faculty of Business and Law is kind of different from the other faculties in the Open University in that it is so liberated that they tell us what to say in every single tutorial.
Wow.
Yes, the other faculties wouldn't dream of it, but because the curriculum is so liberated now, or I'm not sure why, they control very closely what any tutor says in every single one of the tutorials of every single module. So yes, in that sense, I said, well, my students might not believe in it, tutors might not believe in it. So in addition to it being a distraction, I think it might be illegal because you're asking tutors and students to practice a belief that they might not hold. And again, this came back to the point that there are broader ideological objectives to achieve, liberating the curriculum and so forth. And then I apparently completely set off a manager when I replied to that the idea of teaching something that isn't actually relevant to your topic, to the subject that you teach, in order to achieve ideological objectives is something that might be particularly familiar to those among us who hail from totalitarian regimes.
That's absolutely right. And of course, it's not ethical for a teacher to behave in that way.
It's not. No, you are abusing your position in the classroom, essentially. You are abusing your position to use your students as a captive audience who will listen to your political speech. And that is not what university should ever be about. You can cover, of course, in the university course, you can cover controversial issues. But if you're covering a controversial issue, it's your role, really, your responsibility as a tutor to introduce your students to the full range of ideas that are out there on the subject that you're teaching, and then to equip your students with the critical thinking skills to grapple with all those different ideas and to develop their own thoughts on it, to learn how to articulate their own thoughts on it. That's what universities have traditionally done when they've taught controversial theories, not pick one side in a political debate and teach that as the right one.
So the Open University's defence is that they say, well, you know, it's not trans-inclusive unless you are saying that you personally also believe in this and everyone else must believe in it. What do you make of that criticism?
Well, I mean, that particular dismissal ground just seemed particularly ridiculous. I mean, what this comes back to is the fact that, well, they gave 4 dismissal grounds, essentially all for the same actions, as in questioning the teaching of genderism as part of the criminal law module. And one of them was that I had violated the transgender staff policy. Now, the transgender staff policy is a policy that deals with how the university responds if a member of staff comes out as trans, which is fair enough to have a policy like that. Now, of course, that wasn't my situation, because I wasn't in a situation where any member of staff or any student or anybody at all had come out as trans. But there's a sort of preamble at the start of the transgender staff policy which says something along the lines of the Open University is committed to being an inclusive and trans-friendly and respectful space.
Right.
And from that, they then draw the silly conclusion that apparently, in questioning the teaching of genderism as part of criminal law, I had created an environment that wasn't trans-friendly, and I had therefore violated the trans staff policy, and that was a sacking offence.
Now, a lot of people will be shocked to hear this, particularly because, you know, I've had Joe Phoenix on this show before, who faced similar problems at the OU, set up a gender-critical research network, was harassed and bullied to the point where she ended up being diagnosed with PTSD for holding those legal beliefs. These are beliefs that are protected in law. Why don't people who are involved in the teaching of law know the law?
Yes, I think that's a very good question, yes, at least. I mean, Joe Phoenix was in social sciences, and you might forgive social scientists for not understanding the law. But I think you're quite right, because I spent a number of months trying to explain to my colleagues and to my managers why what we were being asked to do was illegal, in my view. And yes, I think you're quite right. You'd think that any senior law academic worth their salt should be able to identify or recognise a violation of equality law when it is pointed out to them, should be able to recognise a violation of human rights law when it is spelled out to them.
Yes.
So I think there are 2 possible conclusions here. Either they're not very good at understanding the law, or they don't have any intention of respecting the law.
And, of course, you mentioned the way it is in totalitarian regimes. You know, it's funny that everyone who's come from countries which have that kind of background, they don't take this stuff for granted. And they're quite surprised when they see people in this country trying to impose ideology at, you know, at the cost of being sacked.
I think you're probably more attuned to that kind of thing if you've grown up with totalitarianism, which, well, I personally haven't. I haven't grown up in a totalitarian regime, but I have grown up with the family memory of it. I've even grown up with these sort of East German books on the bookshelf where you had this experience of look up any subject in the encyclopedia and it's sort of related back then to Marxist ideology, and any term you look up ultimately ends with an explanation of how this particular concept confirms that Marx was right.
Wow.
So,
those are books that have been passed down to you from family members?
Well, I mean, I was 10 years old when the Berlin Wall came down. My parents had East German books as well as West German books on their bookshelf.
Yes, yes.
So it was quite natural for me growing up to sort of read East German books and compare them to West German books.
Yes.
In that sense, I just developed a particular sensitivity, I suppose, to this habit of just using any subject and turning it into a vehicle to convey the dominant political ideology.
So you've seen all this before?
I have absolutely seen all this before. I've had family members for several generations being punished for not going along with teaching the ideology du jour. I wasn't going to be the first generation in my family sort of further circle by just blindly going along with it.
Absolutely not. I'm really pleased that you've come and told this story, because I think a lot of people will be shocked by it. Can people help in any way? I think you've got a crowdfunder at the moment.
I do have a crowdfunder, so if people Google my name and Crowd Justice, Almut Gaddo and Crowd Justice, or if you follow the Free Speech Union on Twitter, they have been regularly tweeting about my case, so that will take you to my crowdfunder.
So the Free Speech Union are helping you at the moment with all of this?
They absolutely are.
Because you've been, they sacked you, right?
Yes, they have sacked me, and hopefully, well, we're trying to create a precedent and a test case that tests some of the points about the protections in employment law for academic freedom. So it is, as far as the Free Speech Union are concerned, also an important case more widely and beyond just me winning a just outcome. It will hopefully create a precedent for protecting academic freedom in employment law.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Almut Gaddo, thanks so much for joining me tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So a spokesman for the Open University said the following, said that it would vigorously defend itself against Dr Gadot's charges. We strongly dispute the account which we understand Almut Gadot to have given to the media about the circumstances of and reasons for her dismissal, the university's criminal law curriculum and modules, and its equality, diversity and inclusion policies. OK, well, next on Free Speech Nation, have we reached a tipping point in the gender wars? I'm going to be speaking to comedy writer Graham Linehan. Please don't go anywhere.
Hello, welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go through Monday, it's going to be turning increasingly hot and humid for some of us, with the risk of thunderstorms in the northwest, but it will be turning fresher later. Looking at the bigger picture, we've got an area of higher pressure across the UK. Further towards the west, a deep area of low pressure, and that's helping drive southeasterly winds. So through the rest of this evening, many places staying largely dry, but as we go through the night, we'll see the risk of thunderstorms developing firstly in the west, but then across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland later, and we have got some weather warnings in force, so expect frequent lightning, torrential downpours and some gusty winds. And temperatures overnight, well, it's going to be feeling quite uncomfortable, some places not dipping below 20 degrees. Now, as we start Monday morning, we have this band of heavy, thundery, showery rain across western parts of Scotland, moving its way north and eastward, so there could be some difficult driving conditions in this, with frequent lightning as well and some torrential downpours. Northern Ireland turning drier as the day progresses, and across much of England, largely dry but cloudy further toward the west, and already feeling quite warm by 8 a.m. So as the day progresses, that band of rain will continue to push its way north and east, with some thunderstorms even ahead of that as well. So they can't be ruled out completely across the south, but many places should largely miss these. Many places seeing some hot sunshine, especially across the southeast. It's going to be feeling very hot and humid, with highs of up to 34 degrees, but fresher further towards the west. As we go through Tuesday, still a warm start in the south and east, but bright elsewhere. Then we have another band of rain moving in from the west, so turning increasingly cloudy, with outbreaks of rain for many across western areas, sunshine and showers behind that, and that sets the scene through Wednesday and Thursday, with unsettled weather on the way, but turning fresher as well. Bye-bye.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
She could have saved Storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Have we reached a tipping point in the gender wars? So 6 years ago, comedy writer Graham Linehan, the man who created hit sitcoms such as Father Ted and Black Books, was cancelled for standing up for the rights of women. But have things actually got any better? Well, I'm delighted to say that Graham Linehan joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Graham, you've obviously been on the show before and your case has been very well publicised, but just in case anyone's watching who doesn't know what happened to you, what happened?
Well, I just noticed women being bullied online and in you know, physical space as well, and I started objecting to it. I immediately started losing work.
And this was just on Twitter or social media?
Yeah.
Just making that point?
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, I had what I thought was a bit of a kind of safety net in the Father Ted musical, which I saw as my pension.
Yes.
And finally, that was taken away too by my spineless colleagues, I'm afraid.
I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? Because, you know, Father Ted, one of the most famous sitcoms of all time, the musical, a surefire hit.
Yep.
Still hasn't been produced.
Yeah.
Still being held hostage by Hat-Trick Productions, who are the people who have the rights, yeah?
Yeah. It's because I mean, it's a combination of things. It's because they're terrified of activists. They have activists within the company, and they don't have enough interest in the women in their lives to investigate the issue. It's an insane situation.
And one of the things that's been so surprising in your case, I mean, obviously I've read your book, Tough Crowd, which is brilliant. What I love about it, it's mostly about comedy, about the craft of comedy. You also talk about what ultimately happened, is that people within the comedy industry, supposedly the most creative people in the world, didn't come out and defend you, or even suggest any, or give any signs that they were curious about these issues.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary thing. I mean, I've seen Armando Iannucci this week, who was a colleague of mine. I worked on a couple of shows he did, and I appeared on the Alan Partridge show. And, you know, I've said many times to him that I've been cancelled, I've lost my livelihood. You know, why do you ignore all this? You know, because he's one of these people who seems to think that cancel culture doesn't exist. But I'm kind of like a living example of it, and he just kind of breezes over it. And it's because that it's hard to explain, but they simply do not want to address this issue. And if they acknowledge that I exist, they acknowledge that the issue exists. And they are pretending, people like Armando, people like Rufus Hound today, they are all pretending that this isn't an issue.
Are they just afraid that it might happen to them as well?
I don't know. I think it's a combination of things.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of fear. I genuinely don't think they have enough curiosity or empathy with women to actually look into the issue. They seem to think that women's rights, as people like Alistair Campbell often say, are a culture war issue. And, you know, we've seen it reach its apex, really, in that this week, and for 10 days, I think it is, we've seen men hitting women, punching women in the boxing ring.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's kind of what I'm curious about now. Is this as far as it goes, or is it going to get worse?
So that's a really good question, isn't it? You know, with a male individual winning gold in the boxing at women's.
Oh, no.
Yeah, well, there's
Maybe
two.
Won a silver, did he?
Well, yeah, so there's two medalists who have an intersex condition, which is not the same as a trans issue.
They don't necessarily have an intersex condition. They've just said they have.
We don't know, do we? Because no test results have been released or anything like that.
This is something I spoke about today with Dr. Emma Hilton, who I know you know, who is a biologist, and she's worked with a lot of people with DSD conditions. And the whole DSD question has actually been brought up to further muddy the issue, to confuse people, to make people think that, you know, this poor woman is being so terribly hard done by. And all it is a smokescreen to cover up that a number of women were punched in the face over the last 10 days by men in the boxing ring, and an audience of millions just watched it happen.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned Rufus Hound, who just tweeted out, "This is a woman, stop complaining."
Yeah.
If this is a woman, why does this individual have XY chromosomes? Has he even asked that question? Is he interested?
That's a really good question. No, I think there's a lot of people, and I have a word for them, and I think it's shared by a few other people, NPCs, which is the name for when you're playing a computer game, all the people you meet who aren't human beings.
Yes.
Now, that's not to say I don't want to take away Rufus's humanity, but he is behaving from a set script. He is just reciting things he has heard from other people. He is trusting that his fellow non-player characters are telling him the truth. And of course, they're all either lying or they simply don't know.
So, but as you say, the spectacle of someone actually being punched, a matter of physical safety now, can this be the tipping point? I mean, judging from this week, it looks like not.
Yes, but I think there's some things to be cheered up about. First of all, I just wanted to make sure people know, a man punches a woman it's something like 146% times harder than a woman can, you know? So a woman could actually be killed in the ring. And the great thing about this week, even though you see the usual obfuscation, the usual, you know, useful idiots like Hound and Laurie Penny and people like this, Seb Coe, he may be the next Olympics. He may take over from the lunatics who were running it this year. If he does, he said something like, I have daughters, of course this is an interesting subject to me. And I think he was actually very, very shocked by what happened over the last 10 days.
Well, and we've also had, for instance, Wes Streeting saying he's going to implement the caste review.
Is another good example, yes.
So, you know, although there's a lot of resistance within Labour, they still haven't apologised to Rosie Duffield. But are you optimistic now that this kind of, with the caste review, even though so many people are denying that it even matters, ultimately, sometime in the distance, the truth has to win out.
Yes, it does. But I think the major problem at the moment is that the BBC has so little authority. It used to be the gold standard in terms of news. We look to the BBC to kind of make sense of the world. And the BBC, only The Guardian is as dishonest as the BBC in reporting on this issue. Sorry, The Guardian and Pink News.
Pink News goes without saying.
But like the BBC is actively trying to suppress the information around this issue. They're actively trying to confuse the public, and they are. I genuinely think that when this is all over and there is what do you call it, an investigation, I can't remember the word, but an investigation is a whole affair. I think the BBC has to be investigated too, because they have let this all happen.
Well, I mean, they claim, I mean, I actually contacted the BBC to ask why they hadn't covered the WPATH files, for instance, you know, and they just came back with some boilerplate about how, well, we can't cover every story was effectively... What do you make of that defence? Do you think that's fair?
Well, I'll tell you what, that defence might make sense if the WPATH files didn't reveal that the entire edifice of trans healthcare is built on sand. You know, these are a bunch of ideological lunatics. The head of WPATH wasn't even a doctor. And most of all, and I know I go on about this, but it's one of those things that I still can't believe isn't a massive scandal.
Yes.
WPATH linked to a page full of child pornography about castration.
Yeah, this was the eunuch files.
The eunuch archive.
Yeah.
It was something like 5,000 erotic short stories about castration, and 40% of them were marked minor.
Yes.
So that's 40% of them are about castrating children. So the organisation that's saying we should castrate children is also linking to a website for men who are turned on by the idea of castrating children.
And because that sounds...
How is that not news?
And people will say that's incredible, can't be true. So I would just alert them to WPATH version 8, Standards of Care.
Yes.
The draft version, which they uploaded, had that link in it.
Yes.
And this was all reported by Redux magazine.
And it also included eunuch as a gender identity.
Yes.
And when the WPATH files came out and Redux reported on this, they removed all this from the website immediately.
So they knew there was an issue there.
Yeah.
All right, well, Graham, thanks so much for joining. I want to just finally mention your book, Tough Crowd. Just how's that been going?
You already did.
Oh, I know, but I think you should mention it again.
It's going okay. It's going okay. It's hard to find in bookshops because the people who run bookshops don't want it to do well. So if you do want it, I would say go to Amazon or any kind of online dealership.
Fantastic. Graham Linehan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And next up on Free Speech Nation, it'll be this week's Social Sensations. Don't go anywhere.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We got an incredible story this week of a young teenager who has raised more than £5,000 for charity.
13-year-old, just 13 years old, Cameron Hutchison cycled the West Highland Way with his dad, Colin, in just 25 hours, raising money for international food charity Mary's Meals. And the 96-mile route took Cameron and Colin to the foot of Ben Nevis.
Wow. Now, the organisation provides daily school meals to more than 2.4 million children in countries such as Syria, Haiti and Malawi.
We are delighted to be joined now by cyclist and fundraiser Cameron Hutchison. Cameron, it's so lovely to have you here. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well.
Well, we're very impressed to have you. We are honoured to have you. First of all, do you like cycling?
Yeah, it's one of my favourite sports, so yeah, I just wanted to do that.
What kind of bike did you do that enormous distance in? Did you have a special bike? Was it adapted?
Well, it was my cross-country bike that I just normally use for cross-country races. So, yeah.
Wow.
You can actually see it on the screen there with the blue handlebars. That's the bike I was using.
We can, and quite a route you went on as well. So, Cameron, you're 13 years old. When did you start cycling?
I've sort of been cycling my whole life. So I got a little red balance bike when I was maybe 3 or 2, maybe. And then I kind of just got bigger bikes as I went on.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation, and it's time for Social Sensations. That's the part of the show where we look at what's been going viral this week on social media. So we're going to start with the Royals. Let's have a look.
Greetings, loved ones.
From all of us watching at home, congratulations to Team GB.
Well done on all you've achieved. You've been an inspiration to us all.
OK. Snoop Dogg is not a member of the royal family, I should point that out. But, yeah, William's got a beard, looking a bit beardy.
He's in a shave, did he?
Now, is it just that he hasn't shaved, or is he growing a beard? What do you rate?
Well, he's in the in-between stage, and, you know, Big Willie, as I call him.
Do you? Seems a bit inappropriate.
It does, but, you know, we're close, we're like that. And and Snoop, me, Celine Dion, Snoop, Big Willie. Yeah. I think we went to McDonald's once. It might have been Wimpy, I can't remember.
Anyway, mind, Paul.
I am losing my mind.
So the beard thing, because if you start growing a beard, there is that moment where it just looks like you're a tramp.
Yeah.
But then eventually it starts to look quite...
Or, you know, the second in line to the throne.
Well, or either. He can dress as he likes.
Or a policeman trying to, like, be good with the local community.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it is. I think he's bald right now.
He looks all right to me, actually.
He looks all right.
He's a good-looking man, isn't he?
Yeah. He's bald, so I can understand that if you're bald, you should be allowed to grow a beard just to balance your head out.
You should be allowed to do that anyway. You don't get to make the rules about facial hair.
The truth is, it's not just a beard now because beards now have political.
It starts with redefining Islamophobia, and then it's all about when you can wear a beard.
And I'm going to end it there, too.
We're going to move on to this next one. This is an unexpected security scare in Paris. So let's have a look. That's someone climbing up I think that's the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
Someone's climbing up there. That was a security breach, apparently. Do we know what happened there, Paul? Do you have any ideas?
Not really.
No.
Which is just why we're not on live TV.
Just as well,
But I would say the only security risk is to his personal safety, isn't it? I mean, climbing up...
Yeah.
But we don't know what he was going to do. We have no idea what he was going to do. But it was considered a safety risk, and they've stamped on it straight away.
Well, apparently people are stuck up there because of this person climbing up there. But you know, what you need is Grace Jones. Do you remember View to a Kill? Grace Jones has a fight with James Bond up there. If you had Grace Jones up there, that'd be pretty...
As in pull up to my bumper?
You know, of course, yeah. She's pretty tough in that film.
Well, I think it's amazing. Nothing really bad happened at the Paris.
Nothing bad happened. There were threats.
Well, no, the beginning there was something, but that was bad.
There was a naked Smurf at the beginning.
Yeah, there was
two men fought for the women's championship.
But there was also that incident where they blew up the boxes or something, and the trains didn't run. But nothing really bad.
No, well, that's good.
Bad happened.
Well, let's go something a bit lighter now. This is a very excited cow.
Here, try this. Do you want to try it? Well, I didn't know if they were going to eat cooked pumpkin or not, but guess what? They are. Rocco, you really like taking over, don't you? Quick, Sonny, put it in your mouth. Right, Rocco, I'm going to throw you some over there. Go get that.
So I think it's a cow eating a pumpkin. I don't think there's much to say about that. I do want to get some unfiltered dilemmas. So let's start with this one from Sophia. No, because I know you're going to say stuff, Lewis. This is a dilemma from Sophia. She says, my friend's birthday is coming up, but they don't celebrate it. Do I get them a card still? What do you think of that, Paul?
Well, if they don't celebrate it, I wouldn't get them a card. It's like going against their wishes, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So don't get them a card.
Not much of a dilemma. What do you think?
I think getting a card is one of those things that's like, here's some garbage, throw it out.
Yeah.
It's like nobody wants a card. Men don't want flowers. You give a guy flowers, it's like it's not going to make him happy.
Oh, well, look, unfortunately, we are at the end of the show. We normally have a bit more time for Unfiltered Dilemmas. We don't this week. Thank you so much for joining us for Free Speech Nation. This was, of course, the week when Labour were accused of starting a war on free speech. We'll see how that pans out. But thanks to my panel, Paul Cox and Lewis Schaefer, to all of my brilliant guests this evening. And if you want to join us, by the way, go to www.sroaudiences.com. You can come and join us in the studio. Thanks so much for joining us for Free Speech Nation. See you next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go through Monday, it's going to be turning increasingly hot and humid for some of us, with the risk of thunderstorms in the northwest, but it will be turning fresher later. Looking at the bigger picture, we've got an area of higher pressure across the UK. Further towards the west, a deep area of low pressure, and that's helping drive southeasterly winds. So through the rest of this evening, many places staying largely dry, but as we go through the night, we'll see the risk of thunderstorms developing firstly in the west, but then across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland later, and we have got some weather warnings in force, so expect frequent lightning, torrential downpours and some gusty winds. And temperatures overnight, well, it's going to be feeling quite uncomfortable, some places not dipping below 20 degrees. Now, as we start Monday morning, we have this band of heavy, thundery, showery rain across western parts of Scotland, moving its way north and eastward, so there could be some difficult driving conditions in this, with frequent lightning as well and some torrential downpours. Northern Ireland turning drier as the day progresses, and across much of England, largely dry but cloudy further toward the west, and already feeling quite warm by 8 a.m. So as the day progresses, that band of rain will continue to push its way north and east, with some thunderstorms even ahead of that as well. So they can't be ruled out completely across the south, but many places should largely miss these. Many places seeing some hot sunshine, especially across the southeast. It's going to be feeling very hot and humid, with highs of up to 34 degrees, but fresher further towards the west. As we go through Tuesday, still a warm start in the south and east, but bright elsewhere. Then we have another band of rain moving in from the west, so turning increasingly cloudy, with outbreaks of rain for many across western areas, sunshine and showers behind that, and that sets the scene through Wednesday and Thursday, with unsettled weather on the way, but turning fresher as well. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could become the next giveaway winner, with your chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like. Listen to what some of our previous winners have to say about winning big with us.
Hi, my name's Victoria. I won the Spring Great British giveaway. So the day we got the money in our bank account, everything just felt just a lot nicer. We went out for dinner, just enter. And you never expect to win, but I did.
Get your entry in now. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good evening. Welcome to Ben Leo Tonight with me, Josh Howie. Ben Leo Tonight is temporarily covering Mark Dolan tonight throughout August, but as both Mark Dolan and Ben Leo are off having well-deserved breaks, Ben Leo Tonight covering Mark Dolan tonight is tonight being covered by me, Josh Howie. Coming up on Ben Leo Tonight with me, Josh Howie, a tale of two cities, but both have men doing Nazi salutes. Why is there such unequal outrage because of the protests they were on? As the police brace themselves for another week of unrest, Britain's top prosecutor warns rioters they could be facing 10 years in prison. Is the consensus now that prisons work? The government seems to be on the brink of adopting an official definition of Islamophobia following this week's horrific rioting. But would such a ruling be a necessary legal protection or a way of quashing any criticism of an ideology under the guise of racism? As the Paris Olympics draw to a close today after successive controversies and stunning victories, has this round of the global sporting phenomenon been a bop or a flop? Political unrest in Bangladesh leads to targeted attacks on Hindus, leaving 2 dead. But where is the outrage from the media? And I'll be asking political firebrand Anne Widdecombe about the PM's slump in the polls following UK riots. And just what is he going to do now he's been made a new nemesis in Elon Musk? Strap yourselves in, Britain. Let's do this. And we'll have tomorrow's front pages hot off the press at exactly 10:30 p.m. And of course, I'll be joined by my stellar panel throughout the show. Tonight, we have GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, journalist and communications advisor Linda Duberly, and former Conservative MP and farmer Neil Parish, who will be with us shortly due to being held up in a cattle jam. But first, the news with Sam Harris. Francis.
Very good evening to you. I am indeed Sam Francis, and the top stories from the newsroom tonight at just after 9 o'clock.